I felt more alive than I think I ever have. Red mist is a hell of a drug. I emerged from the cell to a chilly afternoon. The snow had settled all over the camp, and the previous ring of drifts had been doubled. I took to it well, finding that in response to the cold, my body grew warm. It felt like an adrenaline boost, smoothed out over an afternoon. Yep, no doubt about it. This stuff wasn't really snow. Nothing's anything these days. My winter postcard frolicking out there served a solid purpose. I was dragging firewood and bricks to the camp's perimeter, where I began to fashion a shed. Ah yes, the classic retreat of the world-weary. For me, it was more of a practical space in which to begin my next project, to turn the camp's disabled vehicles, spare parts, and functioning electronics into a getaway car. I had come to believe that the night fairies were no longer watching. We'd see about that, but if I had some time to myself out here, I thought I might just get away with openly planning my retirement. There were several roadblocks, so to speak. Firstly, I had far too few parts. Secondly, despite having been a driver most of my life, I couldn't tell which parts were functional. Best bet was the army supply truck, which looked really intact on the outside. Inside, the battery and engine had been swallowed up by a black hole. Plus I needed something a little niftier than an overworked juice and a half. I had one thing on my side, though: super strength, welding gear, and a body that regenerated when the novice use of either of these caused fatal injuries. And I didn't even have to pay union dues. I resolved to essentially remove the truck's chassis and drag its undercarriage to my shed, then build something on top of it. Good to have a hobby. It helped with my job too, because all the rummaging I did in the military supplies netted me another one of those little motion sensor turrets. So the army had been behind them all along. They did seem all too advanced for the blunderbuss smiths to put together. Conversely, you'd expect better work of the professionals, something less makeshift. This was, I suppose, just one of the many clues I'd missed along the way, but we'll get to that in due time. Fighting alongside a close relative of the gunslinger I'd partnered up with back in the good old days, another wave of zombies flowed down into my tunnel. Plenty of green glowing ones, faster and in need of more convincing to go back to sleep. Loads got right up to me and banged on the bars or on the doors that would lead them to me. Their fingers were torn apart as they tried to pry pieces of metal from its frame. The turret spat defiantly at them, splitting their attention, if not their skin. Worryingly, the metal on the door frames really was starting to crack. There were 3 doors between me and them. There's one expiry date on my carefully rationed safety. The other was the ammunition supply. I counted out 1,000 cartridges from the overhead magazine, marking each 100th with a red pen, a good after-dinner pastime. By the end of the night, I'd blown through 3 segments and was halfway to the next marker. Had about a week at that rate, if the zombies didn't get stronger, which they would. And in case you were wondering, there was absolutely no way to escape my cell if the Zeds got in. Just safe enough, right? Well, I'm on my toes, Colonel, waiting for the day when I'll be on yours. Almost puts a positive spin on what the zombies had been up to outside. I went out and saw 6 of them writhing around inside a great big pit. It was inside one of the army tents, and more to the point, directly above the barricade room. These fine citizen engineers were digging me an escape tunnel. How kind. Bad news for the tunnel trap then, since the whole premise relied on the zombies being dumb enough to fall for it. And if they were going to start tunneling around themselves, we were going to have a problem. Or I was, given that the sense of peril this discovery brought was a ticket to some pointless additional superpower that the army was quite literally dying to find out about. Long story short, I spent the whole day collecting rocks and mud to fill the pit in, then piled up more material another 6 feet to make a rough dome over my lair. Looks like some kind of ancient burial cairn now. When another civilization discovers it 10,000 years in the future, I might just still be alive in there, in dire need of the latest issues of my graphic novels. The next day I took a field trip. There was a decent town only a mile away, down some hills to the northwest. Lots of the buildings had been looted thoroughly, and there were signs of fighting all over the place. Bloodstains and scorched rebar. Didn't matter to me. I was there for the parking lots. The latest plan was to salvage what I could from the leftovers. I needed a new engine, lights, wires, plumbing, upholstery. I needed everything but axles and a drive shaft, pretty much. So I was now a cool, modern man working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Day shift ripping stuff out of cars, as if I knew what I was doing, and dragging them up the hill to the camp, then night shift in the cell. The whole time I had my eyes on the windows, the distant trees, or the remains of street corners. Night fairies had been very quiet, and this was right around the time they'd probably want to stop me. All I had to go on was the Colonel letting slip how many details of my work they'd missed. Not watching anymore? I thought, with the self-proclaimed president around, they might want to stay up to date. Actually, the president was doing me a favor in that regard. Not that I knew it then. The airbase perimeter grew thick with fresh layers of earthen wall. Soldiers toiled here, while others shot at any movement in the nearby woods. When corpses were found, they were dragged around to the east wall, the weakest of the sections, and the closest to the vector. The tan-vested soldiers from EastCom did most of the lifting, while the black-vested locals stood guard, looking overdressed in their nighttime camouflage. More vehicles came and went, bringing in soil, people and weapons, and taking away body bags to be emptied deep in the woods. Often there was shooting at the gate to clear the way, so much so that most stopped bothering to bring their heads up from their work when the gunpowder sounded off. There was plenty of hard work inside the base's many and growing buildings too, and none considered themselves to be working harder than the President of the United States, sitting and smiling at Colonel McNamara's desk. "EastCom, when I came in, wanted you strung up and killed for treason," she was saying. "Yes," the Colonel grunted. He offered an incomplete laugh. "I'm sure Ms. Hassan made for vitriolic company in that regard. Good thing this is the bacteria's world now, then. It already killed the real traitors. I was just doing what I had to do." "Oh, I don't disagree with that. You did a wonderful job. You're a hero, Colonel." "I doubted it the whole time, Madam President. Now I'm proud to give you a weapon that will tame this world for good. Hell, that's not even the start of what it's going to do." I know. I'll be right as rain soon enough. The treatments are being tested. We'll set up new convoys to bring in the materials and, if you don't mind, we manufacture here, do you?" "It would be an honor. More so than you've already given me." "Nothing to it. Me and you got something in common, you know." "How's that?" "They both called us crazy in our day." "Makes it sound like a lifetime ago. Ink's hardly dry on the warrant for my execution." "Or my declaration of war. Better make good on it all then, don't you think?" "Let loose, fly high, and damn the rest to hell, Madam President." "And that's an order." Both turned to look at the opening door. Bibi Hassan entered, dressed in olive fatigues. "You've got fuel to run, out!" the Colonel barked. "Colonel, I've brought all the fuel that's left," Hassan said, deadpan. The Colonel looked to the President, who didn't know anything about it either. "Here's what we're going to do," Hassan continued. Trying to make your own working car, and one that keeps the zombies out at that, turns out to be a difficult task. I suspected as much. Remember that guide on making vehicles from salvaged parts I got a while back? Guess who finally knuckled down and gave it a read? It did help, and I gleaned some idea of how to wire a dashboard up, what manufacturer's stuff could be compatible with each other, and what to weld and what to rivet. Had scary machines for both. A real crash course, with extra crash. I was doing some of the finer work in the cell to avoid drawing attention, yet the doorless shed with a pile of scrap metal in it up there would give my game away fast if anyone cared to stop by. One evening, 4 days into the build, I was walking back to my hall for dinner and caught the sound of that camera equipment buzzing. The battery was more than half full. No excuses this time. I tried to wipe the oil from my hands, then settled to sit on the ground holding the camera, probably only transmitting an extreme close-up of my oversized BDU jacket. "Mr. Hobb," the Colonel's voice buzzed, "you kept us waiting a long time." "So you found my name?" I said. "Yes, one of the first things we found. What are you doing with the camera?" We had a brief debate on whether I should point the camera at my face, which achieved nothing. During that time there was a lot of background noise. It was people entering the room, finally revealed when the microphone was passed to the President. She drizzled praise all over me in her almost foreign accent, then a more interesting statement. "Once you're out of here, we're gonna do everything we can, you know?" "Nope, explain it now," I said. Look at me bossing the President around. There was a pause. Sounded like the mic was passed around, but it ended up back with the Prez. You've given everything for this country. You're an example to us all," she recited. "The medals don't come big enough, I'll tell you that for free." "How much for the rest?" I asked, prompting a laugh. Oh yeah, guess it sounded like a joke in retrospect. "Alright, you don't have to tell me, I know, whatever, except for when I'm getting out. Tell me that, and I'll do whatever you freaks want," I added. "As I said, son, normally we wouldn't have put you through knowing as much as you do," the Colonel said, drawing closer to the mic. "It's a shame we ended up in this strange situation." Well, I couldn't disagree with that. "You guys know I'm immortal, right?" I bragged. Got another laugh. "Damn right we know it. We've been ironing out the kinks there," he said. "What?" "Our work. Your work too, really. The work to remake this country, using you." "What's in it for me?" I asked. Yet more laughter. Made me want to laugh myself, in a lobotomized sort of way. "It's true, we're keeping information from you, and later you'll see that this is quite important. That said, I've a feeling you'll be finding out quite a lot shortly. President gave permission for it all, nothing to worry about there." "Only because you've been such a help," the President chimed. Yes, the Colonel concurred. "There's something I want you to see first, and some stuff you'll want to get. You got your map?" I got my map out and took down some coordinates. The Colonel was pointing me towards a valley to the east, close to the edge of the infection zone. He said that was where the first prototype of the safety cell was worked on, and that there were some military supplies still there. "You'll see there it's all..." I didn't really see it right at the end. "Our Vector, one of your predecessors, caused some issues for us. Ended up trying to... I think he started a fire. Just be careful there, and if you catch my drift, you might see why all this has been the way it is." With this vaguest of possible promises, the Colonel passed me on to a large selection of people, who all had questions about the details of my day-to-day life in the zone. I think I was being interviewed. I gave short answers, and told them a lot about my gun collection. They were very interested, and one guy asked after the customizations and adaptations I'd made over the weeks to some of the pieces. Didn't seem like the usual President's entourage, or maybe the greys and suits weren't really the people I'd always imagined. Was the moral that they were human after all, unlike me? This eventually came to a close, with the President promising she had a special surprise coming for me. I signed off without futile follow-up questions, and clanked down the tunnel for the night. Slept in late and surfaced around midday for a bike ride east. It was a grey and cool day, a rarity. I rode for an hour. When I passed clearings, I saw the shadowy rubble wall peeking above the tree line. The white frosting merged into the overcast sky behind it, making it almost seem natural. The amount of work that went into making it must have been ridiculous. Lots of power, no idea what to do with it. Ah, the good old days. I arrived at the site. It didn't look very military, nor very real. It was a large family house right out of a suburb, airdropped in a thick forest, with no roads or utilities. It was surrounded by a head-high red brick wall, although the gateway was missing. The bricks were unweathered, newly made for the job, I'd say. The roof was in poor condition, with large pieces missing and fire damage on the rest. Looked like a lightning strike, although the flagpole and the surrounding trees made that less plausible. I went up there first, climbing up where the roof sloped down to the ground floor on one side. The attic was full of concrete building stones, still wrapped up on pallets. Surprising the wooden boards underneath could even take all that weight. They were arranged in a way that formed a pen around the hole in the roof I entered through. Or, more likely, around the other guy who was sitting in the corner when I arrived. An orange figure threw off a cloak of dust and lunged forward. Its face was incomplete, locked eternally in a burned state by the industrious, misguided bacteria, I suppose. I knocked away the thin, outstretched arms with my shotgun and fired off a few shells. The ugly face was gone after that, and the body fell back to sleep. It reminded me of what I saw when I first woke up, a fire-scarred body emerging from the cremation oven in that funeral joint. Fire doesn't work. Guess people everywhere learned that the hard way all at the same time. The real story in the attic was waiting for me in the basement. The rest of the house was just living quarters, or a house basically. Underneath though was a construction yard / mad science lab. The basement door was barricaded. While I was pushing it open and shooting out the locks, army zombies came to fight back, shot them away through the holes I was making and carried on in. This was the place the colonel was coyly pointing me at. Inside there were old computers like in my camp, complete with abandoned digging equipment. One wall of the basement had been opened up, and the beginnings of a tunnel curved down into the soil and rock. No more than 20 feet, nothing useful. One corner of the basement was divided off with thick canvas. I pushed some aside to look in. Rows of metal-framed beds covered in flesh. Human flesh, for sure. Or at least flesh fused to human skeletons. It was warm and stinky, just like the half-revived animal corpses I'd hunted for my fertilizer. I think it was the human equivalent, corpses that the bacteria tried and failed to reanimate. Something had kept them alive all this time. Place wasn't airtight. Red mist was probably getting in through the weep fence. Was this what the colonel wanted me to see? There was more to it. Firstly, there were crates with supplies, bullets and food, actually pretty useful for extending my stay in the superior next attempt at a basement dungeon. Secondly, the reports. A computer desk had a neat pile of printed correspondence right next to a printer. Printouts of an email conversation looked like, with the convenience that the final set of pages had all the messages in the chain in reverse order, a cascade of replies. The rest were just earlier repeats of these. This was an interesting read. The most recent message, from 7 months back, asked the soldiers stationed here to surrender and proceed to the designated checkpoint. The twist was that the message before said that headquarters is being compromised by the insurgents, and therefore future messages should be ignored. Looks like they were right. Whoever was receiving these emails was just acknowledging them and asking after the status of certain units. Waiting for evacuation forever, I bet. This was probably something to do with the reason my old tower had been partially blown up. Perhaps Crazy Jake had taken to email scams after that. But what the colonel was really getting at, I think, was before this drama, back when the emails concerned the work going on in the makeshift lab. They had a vector, must have been among the first. The dates were just weeks after I'm pretty sure I remember being alive in regular society. From the back and forth, I gathered that their chosen one had gone berserk after a debriefing and locked himself in the attic. This was the excuse the colonel wanted to deliver. He couldn't brief me because some guy had got mad at being forced to be an evil science gladiator at the end of the world. Looked like the fire that killed him up there was of his own making. I felt pretty weird about all this. It seemed like I hadn't just killed another regular zombie. I went back up and the corpse wasn't there. The gore from the shooting confirmed it hadn't been a dream. I looked out through the hole, but didn't see any streaks of shambling orange among the swaying trees. Well, I guess you're free to go, man. Just as well, because whatever the scientists were using you to do wasn't actually working. That's where the weird flesh sacks on the beds fit into the puzzle. It sounded like they didn't have the whole red mist thing then, and were instead using what they called aeroplankton helmets. They all wanted something better, but the other end, sanbet30 at east.com, claimed the satellite negotiations were going nowhere. Heat ray? When in doubt, they're talking about a heat ray. That saves some thought. All of that was the main thrust of this new intel. The take-home lesson was that I should stop complaining, I think. Didn't actually help in any way. Luckily, I hadn't expected it to, so no disappointment really. I wasn't the first guy in my position, and was probably the last. The rest of them didn't go so well, and keeping me in the dark was all they could come up with to avoid any rebellious suicide. Now it was too late for that, right? So the floodgates open and I discover that I've been used the whole time. Not really a shock. Doesn't change my mission. Back to work in the town the next day. Found some working power outlets to charge a nice big truck battery, and got easily electrocuted enough to kill a regular human in the process. Again, being a superhuman monster has its perks. Still couldn't grow a decent beard, but I guess the bacteria has to work with what it has. I carried on for a few days, making a bit of progress, realistically with little hope of finishing my scrap heap tank thing. I got plenty of materials to work with. Putting them together was a hurdle I kept putting off, not looking forward to the trial and error. The good news, perhaps the best news of the whole ordeal, was that I didn't need to worry about this. I heard a strange rasping noise from the surface one morning and went out. Camp was clean. Then I checked the shed. There was movement. "Hello, Vern," Bibi Hassan said.